Hello and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Prag Jaodekar, Technology Director with Synechron. Hopefully, you are sufficiently caffeinated, and this is going to be a very positive talk. Let me start with the outset of that. Essentially, we're going to talk about enterprise adoption of AI, and we're going to talk about the challenges and opportunities that we see in that particular space, and how best to kind of navigate that across. So when we start, I need a clicker. When we talk about enterprise challenges, how best to navigate those challenges, and always a good idea to kind of start with uh, setting up the context and what we've seen so far. And in a way, it's a good thing that I'm probably the last speaker. So let's look at what has happened in the last 2.5, 3 years, right? So what we've seen is, since the publication of Attention is all you need, the Google research paper, we've seen the exponential growth in large language model, which essentially culminated in the ChatGPT launching in the scene 2022. And since then, over the last 2 years, what we've seen is the complexity of large language model has grown exponentially. What we've seen is the global AI spending has gone significantly up, right? And as a result, what we've seen is there are a number of AI unicorns that have been created as a result, and there's a huge amount of economic activity that's being driven through AI, essentially. Unicorn, in that particular case, for those of you who do not know the definition, are companies that are currently valued at $1 billion. So that's quite amazing to have that sudden rise in those companies. Some of them are, you probably are aware, NVIDIA, for example, made the market capitalization of NVIDIA went to $3 trillion. It's crazy in a short span of time. But while all these positive moment was going on in the market, I think since last couple of months, people have started to question things a bit because people invested a huge amount of money and they were essentially concerned about what's happening, right? People are saying, oh, probably OpenAI is the only one probably making money. We don't have sufficient number of applications that are in production. So of late, what we've seen is that these kind of reports. There's a cool VC firm based out of Silicon Valley, Sequoia, that essentially started to question AI $600 billion question. Goldman Sachs published a research saying that what's happening with AI, right? So obviously, there's a lot of concern and anxiety within the enterprise around the ROI on AI. What's happening? Where is the money going? So when we look at enterprise AI adoption, it's probably a good idea to try and understand what sort of buckets that we see within the market. So there are 3 buckets of sort of adopters. The very first bucket is the exploration bucket, people who are roughly 40% who are still sort of doing their POC, POV with AI, still trying to understand, trying to find out the use cases. Then there are roughly 32% who are in initial adoption phase. So they've got a number of different business units, they've got the number of use cases, they've started on it, the journey, but they have not productionized it yet, right? And then finally, there are roughly 18% who have started to integrate AI into their workflows, and they've started to get value out of AI, but these are few and far in between. And this is based on the ServiceNow AI Maturity Index that was conducted a couple of months ago. So across these 3 adoption buckets, what we see is they're dealing with different types of challenges, right? So people who are in exploratory bucket, they're still concerned around the perennial question of data safety and security. They're talking about, they are sometimes limited by their challenges around availability of resources, the operational readiness to get the tech inside the organization, because it's quite a challenge sometimes. And the other thing that we've seen is rarely there's an organization that has figured out the full AI and data policy framework. And as a result, when you start on the exercise, you don't really have the availability of right data and right quality of data, more importantly. People who are in the middle bucket, they essentially, what you've seen, you've probably seen this with cloud adoption as well. As when adoption start across different business units, what typically tends to happen is there's a bit of a wild, wild west going on, wherein people start to do a lot of things at the same time. You're worried, you need probably some sort of a policy and governance framework to ensure that they are doing things the right way and not the wrong way. So there's a need for governance framework. There are integration challenges. They're trying to understand how best to integrate stuff around. And they're also looking to understand what sort of model would be best fit for what problem statement, and they're trying to validate, fine-tune. And finally, the last group of people are probably looking into more advanced topics like model lifecycle management, They are looking at challenges of integrating and scaling. More importantly, scaling becomes very, very important when you progress in the journey. So across our conversation today, we'll quickly try and touch on some of these challenges and how best to navigate them. So when you talk about the enterprise IT estate, it's very important to understand how a new tech gets adopted in the industry, right? When you talk about cloud, you had different levels of abstraction like IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and you started to kind of convert all of your tech in that stack, right? So if we talk about banking and financial services in industry, that's the industry that I'm closest with. This is a PISA diagram of the 4 business units that you would typically see in a large multinational bank. And if you were to sort of think about the entire IT estate, you have 3 types of systems roughly. You have core systems, so if you are from retail banking, I'm talking about core banking, KYC onboarding. If you're from investment banking, I'm talking about systems like your front, middle, and back office system, custody, fund administration, and so on and so forth. So if we were to consider pizza diagram, and then the green topping essentially reflect the in-house system and vendor system, what would you guys say, what's the split roughly in your respective organization across vendor systems versus in-house system? Is 70-30 a right sort of split for you guys, right? Roughly, people, just you can raise hands. 70-30, yeah? Okay, so roughly on 70-30 scale, if the blue dot represent the in-house system. Now, consider this for a moment, right? When we were during the cloud sort of adoption phase, what we saw is how you are gently nudged towards adoption, right? So what you saw was when you were adopting cloud, many of the vendor systems that you were using for years and years together, suddenly their next version was either available as a solution on cloud or they became SaaS solutions, right? So you were gently nudged towards adopting that particular solution. In case of AI, it's going to be even more subtle because what you will see happen because the market forces that we have, most of the vendor software products will start to introduce AI as part of the feature. Now think about it for a minute, right? You all of a sudden have a deep penetration of AI within your enterprise, and as a consequence of this particular penetration, you are now a deployer of AI systems. And EU AIX, some of you were probably part of the talk, deployer has certain degree of responsibility. There are certain consequences that you need to comply with. So you need to understand that within a very short span of time as a CIO, CTO, you will need to comply with multiple of these sort of deployer obligations. Now, if we were to consider the enterprise again, people are trying to understand what are the best use cases. And we are usually very obsessed with optimizing the dev cycle efficiency most of the time. But if you think about the overall system life cycle, roughly 5 to 10% of the system life cycle is in design and development. 90% of the application life cycle is in maintenance enhancement. And then further 5 to 10%, you're probably demising the system or you're replacing the system with something else, right? So as a consequence of that, your entire IT spending, I'm assuming the 70% of it is RTB, which is run the business, 30% is change the business, right? So if you think about that particular budget, if you were to run with some hypothetical numbers, if your IT budget is $1 billion, you're talking about an RTB of 700 million to 300 million, and roughly you spend 40% of it in application enhancement and maintenance. So you're talking about 280 million, which is roughly equivalent to your CTB budget, right? So any improvement that you can deliver on your RTB, be it 5%, be it 10%, you are essentially going to release that fund available for CTB. So that's quite powerful thing for you to consider. So at the moment, for one of our Swiss multinational bank, what we are doing is we are essentially trying to do that. Typically, what tends to happen is when you are onboarding people, you invest a huge amount of time, right? So you typically go and source somebody, staff somebody, train them, and then have them learn your systems and then maintain the system for a number of months, and then they leave, right? So you lose that knowledge. So the challenge that we put ourselves up for was, is it possible for us to make them commit code on day 0? Is it possible? So of course it's possible from a technical standpoint. You could probably have a machine ready for them to commit code on day zero with the right configuration, source code repository, so on and so forth. But the next half of that challenge is essentially them being able to commit code, i.e. having the knowledge to commit code, right? And that was the bit that was the most challenging bit. So what we did is we tried to look at the knowledge systems that we have within the organization for that particular system. So let's say if you are working with a custody and fund administration system, there are a labyrinth of different systems that you need to learn about. What we did is we started to look at what are the knowledge bases. So ServiceNow, your CMDB, your Jira, your ticket repository, your Stack Overflow, which contains the issue log and how you solve certain number of issues, GitLab, your source code repository. And what we can do to download all those, essentially create a knowledge layer on top of it. And then can we allow people to sort of simply look through L1 support guy who has joined you and he's been assigned a ticket on day zero. He looks at a problem that's occurred probably there is in the ticket and search that knowledge base to see if he can fix it. And many of the cases we've seen there are recurrence of issues that happen. He can quickly go through and understand, validate it with someone, and then start committing code. So we started to work on it. We started to see a lot of improvement through and through. When you talk about CTB AI budget, these are the key things that you need to probably understand and work on. So we'll focus on that in subsequent slides. First and the most important thing is to identify and build your use cases. This is the most important thing that you need to do as part of your AI journey. The first step is, of course, to understand the business pain points and opportunities. It doesn't necessarily need to be business. We just saw in the last example that there's something that you can do in your own backyard as IT, CTO, or CIO. The next part is that you need to be absolutely clear about the outcomes and KPIs that you're going to try and get out of your entire POC and POV, and create a business case. Essentially, it's very important for you to have a benefits reviewed board who are essentially looking through your KPIs, understand how they are going to be delivered through that particular use case. And when you start with the POC, POV, they are very keen on understanding whether the results are trending in the right direction. And third and most important thing is ensuring that the right quality of data is available for you to experiment with. And I mean, here AI, Gen AI essentially can also be very helpful. We've seen a lot of organizations using generative AI to create training data as well and fine-tuning data as well. And finally, you need to go into that proof of concept and start to pivot into the overall your experiment. So the use cases that we've seen so far across the board is chatbot is obviously quite common, contact center management. Then we have developer experience, customer experience, UX onboarding, hiring. Hiring, we are obviously aware that's quite sort of sensitive topic, but what we are doing is we are using it early in the cycle phase. So we're not using it to sort of make a judgment on candidates, but we operate across 20 countries, so we are sort of hiring across different languages. So what we do is when we create a job description, we are using AI to translate that job description, sift through the profiles, scan them, so on and so forth. Now, when you talk about AI training and enablement, it's very important for you to understand the stakeholders that you're trying to address. Most of the people, when you think about AI training, are very concerned or focused on a group of people, which is engineers. But that's just one sort of part of the problem. And what you need to do is you need to create a persona-based training. The first persona that you're trying to create a training for is AI engineers. These are the people who are going to design your AI systems and platforms. Then the second classification that we've done is essentially AI-powered engineers, right? These are the guys who are going to use your tools like ChatGPT, Copilot, Code Whisperer, so on and so forth to solve your business problem using AI. And the third is also very, very important. You need to have all your business users enabled for using AI. So what we've done in the last 1 year or so, we've launched close to 8+ accelerators across the organization. We believe in eating our own dog food. So all the accelerators like chat, HR bots, so on and so forth, are being made available to all our corporate functions. And we have seen firsthand the productivity go through the roof when they started utilizing these systems. And what we believe will happen in the next couple of years is you would see a counterclockwise momentum of individuals because AI is helping make that level playing field in terms of skills over the next couple of years. And then the fourth and the final group of users is the AI-aware end users and customers. It's very important that you keep your users or customers aware of how you are essentially starting to use the technology within the organization that helps build the trust for your organization. More importantly, you can then start to offer them world-class experience. One example could be, we've seen oftentimes companies sending across, huge terms and condition updates on your email. Nobody bothers to read through, and they probably count on it, right? Why don't you introduce something which kind of gives you a quick, short audio clip on what are the changes that you introduce essentially. So when you talk about building scalable AI platform for banking, it can be for any organization. It's very important that you think about the capability model. Sorry, a bit of a tech talk here, but your TOGAF talks about capability models. That's very, very important for you to do it that way. The primary challenge when you start to design any type of horizontal function is data. It's a sticking point, right? Because there are different business divisions that are dealing with different geographies, and there are different residency and localization laws. You can't access data from one division to other division. So you need to start thinking in terms of your core capabilities. So what we propose is how you should go about it, is what we've seen work with many of our clients. As you start by building core capabilities, these are your common structure, standards and policy framework in terms of architecture that are made available. The second one is essentially the common capability. So these are your reusable libraries and patterns that may be useful across multiple LLM systems that you're going to design. And finally, you go to the last bit, which is the distinct capability. So if you were to kind of think about it and ornament the diagram a bit, this is what it would look like. You're essentially talking about a common capability where you essentially deal with access management, policy framework, ragging, so on and so forth. Your common capability could be capabilities like web scraping, your ODS, event management, so on and so forth. And your distinct capabilities could be for different data divisions. Now, the entire model could be made available in two modalities, either in the form of a model in a service or a model as a service model. Model in service is essentially a model optimized for a certain task, whereas model as a service is essentially an abstract service made available to a number of different systems across the enterprise. And you can then ornament it with different federated code repository. You can essentially ensure that there are the right set of design guidelines and standards available. There are design principles, and you can IAC the whole thing. So there are a lot of bells and whistles that are possible. So that's how we've seen this evolve over a period of time, and ultimately the entire thing could be made available through API or web front door, as you can see. Now, moving on to a topic that's very, very interesting, close, and a lot of people have touched upon is the governance, right? So what we've seen in the last couple of years is governments across the globe are very vocal because of public pressure on AI regulation. The only regulation actually is EU AI Act so far. But the good thing about all of these is they are pretty much aligned in terms of the principle. So everybody agrees on fairness, ethics, transparency, accountability. They agree on human agency and oversight and data privacy, right? So when you are designing a governance framework, they are based on these common pillars, and one essentially that's available to us in terms of the EU AI Act, they will essentially survive the test of time. The reason people are not, I think, to a certain extent, building the next sort of AI act across other governments, everybody wants to be a next AI superpower, and they feel that the regulation would essentially hold them back. So if you were to imagine the entire sort of, for a multinational organization, what you would have is you would have a universe of compliance, and universe of compliance would essentially be two-dimensional. The first dimension would be AI regulations that you deal with in that particular region. So for example, if you're operating out of Europe, you're talking about EU AI Act. But then you'll also have to consider your DORA and other GDPR, so on and so forth. So that becomes a second dimension. So your entire regulatory compliance starts and ends with that. And then you have to understand how it affects your policy standards and controls, and what sort of technology do you build to support the entire life cycle from end to end. Okay. Yeah, sure. So The key things that people have talked about so far is the emerging trends. Conversational AI, multi-agent, adversarial AI, and responsible AI. The previous speakers have spoken about adversarial and responsible AI. I won't probably spend a lot of time there, but I would definitely urge you to check out QThai Moshi conversational capability, which is a French company that's been sort of developing this software, and they've made significant progress over there. In conclusion, essentially what we are talking about is if you are starting up, it's very important that you get a right comprehensive AI and data strategy in place, start to build a robust use case design and development process, have the right level of data quality and governance in place, create an AI governance framework, operating model, ways of working to help the organization adopt AI in a big way, update your AI model periodically. It's very important because you obviously see a bit of model drift when you start to use AI. There's AI systems are by nature non-deterministic, and most importantly, you need to keep foster the culture of continuous learning. Thank you, everyone.